Great. Thank you so much. Uh, Normally, they make the lawyer go last in these type of situations. So, what is momentarily Gordon's technological nightmare is my pleasure to be moved up in the speaking order. Just very quickly, a couple of things that I want to talk about. One, the title was a very provocative title that we were given about the new financial architecture. And I'd like to give my own assessment of where we are in building that new architecture. To my mind, what we have at the moment are a series of materials that can be used to build a lot of different things. But none of those things are built yet fully, at least not to the extent that the regulatory question is a static one that we can actually deal with. Second, given that the fluid and incomplete nature of the current financial architecture, I want to talk a little bit about what I see as the key regulatory challenges. Not surprisingly, given that my view is that we're still dealing with an inchoate collection of materials rather than an actual edifice, a lot of these challenges are going to be about how to best marshal our resources, including regulation, in order to help build something that works. And then I'm going to finish with a few thoughts as I look ahead in terms of promise and the potential pitfalls, many of which I see in the current regulatory initiatives in the United States and elsewhere around the world. All right. So, what do I see as the new regulatory architecture? At the moment, I see it as a loose, very loose connection of Coasian experiments. What do I mean by that? I mean that what we're observing are entrepreneurs, governments, other actors experimenting with the optimal boundaries of the firm, what markets do better than firms, what firms do better than markets, and ultimately how to connect these firms and markets in an ever-changing marketplace. These experiments are not just technological. I think, as a couple of other speakers have said, they are also importantly experiments in what can scale and what can ultimately build and maintain the public trust as a necessary component to a functioning financial system. Importantly, these experiments are ultimately the product of a series of technological shocks, and I think it's important to list them for two reasons. One, obviously, is the internet. I still think the development of commercial APIs from about 2001 is the defining technological moment in all of this. There is a world that we never entered into where open finance and open banking built on an API architecture completely eliminates the need for the invention of or development of the crypto ecosystem. But it's precisely because of the bottlenecks associated with the conventional financial system that it took us so long to get off the ground with open finance that we then see agitation for change that ultimately takes the form of the crypto ecosystem. And what I see then fundamentally in these technological experiments, at least for the moment, and this is important for the moment, is a form of unbundling both of financial functions and of technological ones. And since we've been talking about stablecoins today, just to give an example on this, our parents' generation would hold money and make payments through a financial institution called a bank. That bank was a bundle of economic functions in the form of deposit taking, payments, and lending. And that bank would then rely on relatively limited other infrastructure in order to perform a given function like make a payment, so a clearinghouse and a central bank. On the technology side, there was also a relatively small number of players, with typical bank maybe having help from their core service provider, and of course, platform firms like Visa or MasterCard. Now let's compare that to the stablecoin ecosystem. Even starting with, but effectively putting aside the entire ecosystem of, say, the Ethereum network, I then get a stablecoin issuer that is an unbundled institution, not engaging in lending, that issues a given instrument. That stablecoin issuer is relying on a whole ecosystem of third-party firms in order to develop things like security protocols, their interface. They're then relying on two different networks in order to perform their basic economic function. One, a relatively closed network of firms and individuals that have direct redemption rights against the issuer. The other, a far more open set of networks where third parties can trade the stablecoin completely independently of that issuer. Last time I checked, USDC and USDT both traded on approximately 60 or 70 different networks. And then, of course, in order to rebuild the other elements of the financial functions, you've got the entrepreneurs and the fintechs who are building lending protocols and other financial services on top of the core stablecoin framework. So what we're seeing is sort of the Cambrian explosion of business models, firms, and markets, and all of which at a relatively early stage at this point. And just to drive home the Cambrian explosion metaphor, it's worth bearing in mind that there are literally no species that emerged during the Cambrian explosion that are alive today. They're the descendants of those species. But what we're looking at today is very unlikely to be what we're looking at in 5 years, in 10 years, let alone the life cycle of financial regulation, which is often measured in decades or centuries. We haven't lived through a period in a very long time where we've seen this much change in the world. The rest of my comments are really going to be about what that means for regulation and how, to be honest, I think a lot of our regulatory efforts are focused in the wrong places. So what are the key challenges for regulation? The first one is that regulation tends to focus on certain things. It focuses on financial instruments like deposits or securities. It focuses on financial institutions like banks or broker-dealers or asset managers. But one of the things that's going to have to change in this new world is a shift of focus to financial networks. We've, of course, always had financial networks, but they've tended to be self-contained. When I look at a clearinghouse for derivatives, when I look at DTCC, when I look at a payment network, I'm looking at, in effect, a network in two dimensions. And most of the time, historically, I've also been looking at hub and spoke networks. Hub and spoke networks are fantastic for lawyers because we know where to focus our energies, the hub. But once we move to decentralized web-based networks, or start connecting networks with different network structures, which I think is ultimately the direction of travel that we're heading in, we have to start thinking not in terms of financial institutions and markets and instruments, but in terms of how do we regulate the networks both within and across them. Put differently, we've been regulating lions, tigers, and bears for most of the last 200 years. It's time to start regulating the zoo. And I actually think that there are many benefits that come from shifting the focus of regulation away from the path-dependent sort of categories that we've created ourselves towards a more fluid understanding of how finance grows and evolves over time. One of the things that is requiring of us and will continue to require of us as regulators is that we're going to have to remap the financial system, and not just once, but probably on a continual basis until we reach some sort of equilibrium once all of these experiments have played out. I just want to put this up here again to make this point very quickly. This is Shar's map of the decentralized finance stack. There's many maps of decentralized finance. I think this one has the benefit that is at least tractable. But in reality, the sheer heterogeneity of these systems and the fact that what we're seeing is a vertical and horizontal fragmentation of everything within finance from both an economic and technological perspective forces us to come to terms with the fact that the language and structure of our rules do not map on to this new system. The best we have probably is what in Shar's term is the protocol layer, where we actually have stuff that does financial stuff, but has really become clear over the last decade or so. One, the disaggregation of functions often means that you can avoid regulatory categories by unbundling different types of activities. Two, there are all sorts of other actors within this ecosystem that might require some sort of at least mapping, if not regulation. That includes both the governance of the underlying blockchain networks, the software engineers who are creating the applications at the application layer, and really a whole ever-changing network of different market participants. That's not to say that that's what we should be doing, is regulating each and every node within this network. But as a precursor to effective regulation, you have to know who is in that network, where the potential nodes of failure are, but also where the nodes are that you need to build up in order to actually achieve the benefits that come along with new technology and the new architectures that we might build from these ingredients. Challenge number three is then mapping that on to the role of regulation within these new financial networks. Now, some of this is good old-fashioned financial regulation. When I look at the Genius Act or I look at MiCA, I can take comfort in the fact that there are issues of consumer protection, of issues of systemic risk, microprudential safety and soundness, that at least from a regulatory perspective, we understand what it looks like, even if we have to adopt or use new tools in order to achieve those objectives. But the thing I want to highlight is that, again, with the way that this ecosystem is evolving, ultimately its heterogeneity, the fact that it is going to be a network of networks, and that we're at a stage where we still have building blocks but have not built anything, I think the key role for regulation is actually going to fall to what I call network governance. Network governance has three components. The first is we have to come to terms with questions about network access. Daryl earlier was talking about a version of network access that was permissioned. Christian was articulating a vision that was maybe somewhat less permissioned. Ultimately, we're going to have to answer questions about who gets access. That's important for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is eliminating competitive bottlenecks that have historically been barriers to the adoption of new technology, and the creation of value not only for the institutions but their customers. We have experience with this, mostly from other industries. When you think of common carrier rules, for example, for railroads, there are regulatory frameworks out there that envision non-discriminatory access to incumbent networks as a way of leveling the competitive playing field. And the question becomes how tools like that should be used in the brave new world of this new financial architecture. Two, because we're dealing with networks and we're dealing with networks of networks, network interoperability at the technological level becomes extremely important, both because you want to create network effects that can then be passed on to the users of financial products and services, but also because network non-interoperability is an important weapon of exclusion and strategic bottlenecks. The classic example here from outside of finance, or at least in the United States, is Elon Musk and Tesla charger stations, where until they were told that they could not do that, they put a completely useless technological component in all Tesla charger stations that made sure that no other vehicles could use Tesla charger stations. That was forced non-interoperability in order to capitalize on the head start that Tesla had in building a charging station network across the United States. And again, regulation can play a role in eliminating that, both by promoting interoperability, but also by penalizing folks who attempt to use the advantages of incumbency to place walls up that prevent the benefits of these new systems from really taking hold in the marketplace. Lastly, network investment. And this is kind of a tricky one. On the one hand, the basic economics of networks suggest that people are going to compete for the market, which is going to initially lead to overinvestment. But then because of the economics of network effects, we're going to end up with a relatively small number of players. And that small number of players may dilute the incentives of these players in order to engage in ongoing technological investment once they've won the market. At the same time, in a network of networks, there are going to be some parts of the network that create public goods, especially since we're talking about finance. And we might expect underinvestment from the start in those type of or those parts of the overall network stack, in which case there may be a role for public coordination, maybe even public investment in actually bringing these networks into being and making sure that everybody is pulling with the same oar where they need to within the context of a broader competitive system. The last big challenge is the ongoing tension between technology and sovereignty. If you talk or listen to the talking heads, a lot of the time the idea is that networks really don't have borders, in effect. But if you've been paying attention over the last 15 years or so, and I know everybody on this call has, uh, states don't tend to sit still and just accept the fact that networks are borderless. They attempt to impose rules on those borders. We saw it with Libra and Diem. We've seen it in the context of conventional financial networks, both in the wake of 9/11, the Iranian effective financial embargo by the United States, and its co-opting of the SWIFT network by the United States in 2014, and then the reemergence of this with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The fact of the matter is that financial networks are political, and there are a variety of state-level regulatory tools that can be used to attempt to exert control of those networks. The problem, of course, that in doing so, you are fragmenting the networks. Once people start weaponizing financial networks, people will lean towards creating their own financial networks that are immune to that weaponization. And all of a sudden, the thing that we built to generate network effects is actually a fragmented series of networks that fails to fulfill that promise. This is probably the biggest area where governance matters for these purposes and where governance has not been forthcoming. MiCA does not look like Genius, does not look like the Hong Kong stablecoin regulation, does not look like the Bank of England's proposals for systemically important stablecoins. Whether we ultimately achieve the commoditization that Christian was referencing earlier, which I think should be the goal, will ultimately come down to whether we can achieve some sort of multilateral governance of this new ecosystem. And that's just stablecoins. That's not the broader set of financial networks that we've been talking about today, which adds another dimension to that governance challenge across borders. All right, looking ahead, where do I think we are? Where do I think we should be going? I'm going to adopt a skeptical note and say that I don't know what the future is, but I do know that it's not here yet. This has a very important implication for existing regulatory approaches. I think, just speaking of the United States alone, the critical flaw of both the Genius Act and the currently mooted Clarity Act is that they take the current state of technology as the thing to be regulated. But as I started out, all of this, the reason we're having this conversation is a series of technological developments that are continuing to this day. If we treat the current technological state of play as the thing we're going to be regulating for the next several decades or century, that regulation is going to be out of date quicker than I think most policymakers can imagine. And in the process, that's going to distort outcomes for the users of financial products and services. It's going to distort competition because now all of a sudden we've enshrined in regulation a particular technological state of play without really knowing whether it's an efficient technological state of play, and almost certainly one now that is going to distort investment into these particular technologies before we've had a chance to complete these experiments. Two, and perhaps on a more optimistic note, is that ultimately the technology is changing rapidly, but the functions of finance are not. Throughout today's presentations, we've talked about things like price discovery, we've talked about liquidity. I'll throw another one on the table about the ability to make long-term credible commitments to provide things like insurance, pensions, other types of financial products and services. These things don't change. And it's with that in mind, if you keep the functions in sight and how new technology can help perform these functions, that I think the regulation has to go. The regulation can do things like help firms build public trust and confidence. I think there's also a creative role to be played there in actually creating the conditions under which financial networks can emerge and grow over time. And that ranges from everything from informal standard setting to using legal tools to create a level regulatory playing field that then eliminates some of the bottlenecks that have slowed down technological process in finance over the last, several hundred years, I suppose, but in particular in the internet age. That's it from me. The last thing I'll say, I wrote a book about some of this for the folks that are interested, focusing primarily on money and payments. But I will stop there, and hopefully, Gordon has worked out his tech issue.